Hello and welcome to another exciting episode of Releasing Your Inner Dragon with Drake and Marie. I am one of the two hosts, Maxwell Alexander Drake. I'm a fantasy novelist, teach writing all over the world, former lead fiction writer to Sony's EverQuest Next. As always, with me is my other host, Marie.
Hi, my name is Marie Mullaney. I write epic fantasy and I run a world building channel called Just in Time Worlds.
And today, because we're fantasy authors, the topic of today is believability. And we're going to cover a whole bunch of different topics, kind of that pair off of this, that aren't 100% related, other than the fact that they can fall under the topic of believability. But before we begin, as always, please help us fight the algorithm demon, because it's very evil. Like, subscribe, you've got writer friends. Please share this out there. Help us get the word out. And I guess also before we get there, we should have a word from our sponsor.
Right. So I have launched an Indiegogo campaign, which there will be a link to in the description of this episode, where you can get all of my Sangwheel Chronicles books. You can get all of the ebooks for the low price of 11 euros on the perk. It's about $12, I think. And the reason for this is that I am launching my third book of Sangwheel Chronicles. So as part of that, I'm doing an Indiegogo pre-launch kind of packet to see if I can raise enough money to do a professional audiobook narration.
Yep. And I didn't know this. You don't have access to Kickstarter.
No, I don't. In Finland, I don't. So it has to be Indiegogo. We have very weird laws about fundraising. And because Indiegogo attaches everything to perks, it's fine because it counts as a sale. But in Kickstarter, it's more about backing the project. Like, it's really about raising the funds, and you literally just get it as a maybe perk, what you're getting off it. So it counts more as raising funds, and you're not allowed to raise funds in Finland unless you are a registered entity.
So that's the reason for the Indiegogo, if you're wondering. It's like, why didn't you use Kickstarter? Because we're in different parts of the world.
Yep. I would love to use Kickstarter, but there we go.
Yeah. But just, an Indiegogo is a massive platform and, well trusted on that. If you've never heard of it, it's fine. Just go to Indiegogo and actually just use the links down below.
Yep.
All right. So let's get into this. There's so much that we can talk about under this topic. Why don't we start with, because you had talked about and this is, both sci-fi and fantasy, but you had talked about believability in just kind of how you set up your worlds and all this other stuff. And I want to preface it before you start by saying, one of the beautiful things about being a sci-fi fantasy author in either of the genres is we are very lucky. Our readers come into it wanting to suspend disbelief. They do. I say this in one of my classes, people are like, oh, I'm worried that I might do something, really crazy. And I'm like, really? Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer? Like, you think you can do something insane that nobody will believe in? Like, they want to believe this. Yeah. That being said,
yes,
there are limitations for some people.
And so when I read a fantasy book, I am willing to take the most outrageous magic. I am willing to accept anything. For me, it doesn't even have to be a hard magic system. I am perfectly willing to go with Tolkien-esque levels of soft magic systems. I have no problem with it. But in one science fiction case, I read a work where there were creatures that were living on a world that required faster than light travel to get to another world. Okay, so there's a distance significant enough that faster than light travel has to be engaged. Okay? And there are creatures on this world that exactly match creatures on this world. And I mean exactly. And I was just like, there has been no reason for this. There has been no explanation for how these two things are the same. There hasn't even been the environments are the same. They're just completely different. except that they both have this creature on it that is exactly the same. And I'm like, I don't buy it. Like, and the thing is, I will accept almost any reason. You can hand wave it for me. You can say, like, genes were sport. You could say genes came over on an asteroid. You could say absolutely anything. But give me some kind of reason to buy this. Because right now, you're cold giving it to me. You're presenting me with these two facts with no in-world reason for it to be true. So the only thing I have to draw on is my knowledge of our world and how evolution works. And I'm like, there is no way. Like, the chances are astronomically low.
And I think there is a bit of difference between fantasy and sci-fi. In fantasy, I mean, the definition of fantasy is anything that could not exist. So I hate to tell you, but Star Wars is fantasy. It is not science fiction. Just because it has spaceships doesn't make it science fiction. When you get into science fiction, yes, it's fiction. However, and that's why, like, Magic Falls is soft sci-fi. We don't want to get into the hardcore, you have to prove us correct. I mean, because, like, you read The Martian, and to the layman, you're like, wow, this guy did a lot of research, and this is exactly how it would be if I was on Mars. And but there's like a 30-page document that the NASA scientists wrote that were like, this is the dumbest thing ever. This would never work. And this is why this guy would be dead. And so, but that's fine. It's with soft sci-fi, the majority of the masses are not going to really know what you're talking about, and you're not going to go into detail about this stuff anyway. You don't get that until you get into the really hard sci-fi, and then those people, fantasy or fans of the hard sci-fi, I don't read or write hard sci-fi.
Me either.
So I do believe that with fantasy, we do have a lot more leeway or flexibility or whatever, because magic, like, we can do anything we want. And I think I've told this story before, but I have that one rocket scientist, an actual JPL rocket scientist that's a fan of mine, and he sent me that email when there was that mistake, and he did this 6-page document on solar system creation, and I won't go into why, but at the end of it, he said, because you can't magic away physics. And I was just like, oh, hold my beer.
Yeah.
That's the whole magic.
I will magic away physics any day of the week.
Right.
But even in fantasy, you have to give a reason, right?
You have to give us something.
If that reason is magic, that is 100. Your readers will swallow it. Okay? Yes. But that magic has to be set up, and they have to understand that it's in play. Yes. And then if that's the case, they'll buy it, no problem. It's the same as this evolution problem, right? If the author had given me anything, if the author had given me absolutely any reason, like they'd planted across DNA, whatever, they'd colonized it, the rock eggs had come up, whatever, it doesn't matter. Give me some reason for this. Anything, just something.
Yeah. And that's where I do believe even soft science fiction differs, because I do believe you need a little bit more than just magic. Like, you need not much more, especially in sci-fi. I mean, we did a lot of hand waving in Magic Fall, supersymmetry, which is almost kind of like this magical type of, science. But that's fine.
It's so magic.
It really is. Yeah. But that's fine, because it's still, everything gets grounded in that. And we teach the audience what they need to know to understand why things are working the way they're working in this world through the science of supersymmetry. And then they just, like, because they don't know what it actually is. I don't even know if anybody really knows what it actually is, but
it's a theoretical concept.
Right.
String theory.
So, we still go through and we teach the audience, like this is how it works and these are the laws, and because the character's learning at the same time, and so it's a very organic way to get it to them. And then now those laws are set up, and so they're like, oh, the ants that were a half a 2 centimeters long a minute ago are now 3 feet long. And then tomorrow they're going to be half a centimeter again, or 2 centimeters again. Like, what?
Yeah.
But and from rain. But
Yeah.
it's like, well, this is why this would work in this science.
In
Right.
this world, it works like this. And that's
Right.
the thing. Like, you can do virtually any, like we literally had, there's the storm that hits, and these ants do in fact grow, to be 2 feet long and breathe fire. And it's fine. because the storm, because it's like, what's going on, says the character. And then the mentor character is like, well, it's because of the supersymmetry that is, amped up by the storm, and it's causing the radiation to expand, which is making them grow like fungi. Okay. None of that is real, obviously, but it is believable in the context of the world.
Because everything becomes consistent.
Yes.
We hold that consistency, and this, because that is kind of the magic that we're using. Well, we're using it too, because we're also using the nanobots, the Jiren stuff. But those we set up, and we, it doesn't matter if it's not real or not. It's real to this world.
Yes.
And to this story. And so, yeah, you have to, I think with science fiction, even soft sci-fi, you are required to maybe give a little bit more than just a hand wave.
The thing with science fantasy, let's call it science fantasy, right? That kind of field, is you should ideally ground even your technology into some kind of, it can be a magic system. You can hand wave the crap out of the science you use, but it should, like, instead of having a magic system grounded on nothing, it should be a magic system grounded maybe in like quantum energy manipulation, or string theory is real and these people can manipulate supersymmetry, which would give you the same kind of effect as being able to manipulate quantum. So you need some kind of realistic thing. And from there, you can do anything. You can treat it exactly the same way you treat magic, right?
Yeah.
Because we don't know enough about those fields for you to be right, wrong, like whatever. Like, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean?
And it even goes beyond that. You don't want to be accurate in fiction. You really don't want to be much more than 80% accurate. And that may sound weird when you're like, wait a minute, now, why wouldn't I want to be accurate? The reason is once you go across that threshold of about 80% real world, it becomes boring. So case in point, there was a story I wrote for Sony that, so let's just say I dabbled on the wrong side of the track when I was growing up. And one of the things I loved was lockpicking and safe cracking. And I studied it and I did it, and I, got into some trouble with it. And, I'll just say, if you have a 12-year-old child, don't buy them a lockpick set. Just gonna throw that out there as a parenting advice. I heard that from a friend. Let's just say that. And so there's this scene where in this story, I get to pick a magical lock. And for whatever reason, I had never written a lockpicking scene. And so I was like, 2.5 pages. 2.5 pages of the most breathtaking, beautifully written lock-picking moment that you'll ever read in your, or actually that you will never read in your life. Because I turned it in, and my editor at Sony was like, okay, yeah, great, as always, but I got one question. What the frick are you thinking? Like, why am I reading 2.5 pages of this lock-picking scene? And I'm like, oh, right. Yeah, that's probably boring for everybody else, isn't it? It was really good for me. And so it ended up being maybe 2 paragraphs when it was all said and done. But the story doesn't end there. And that's the most amazing thing. Because the reality is when you aren't 100% accurate, you are going to hopefully have fans like the JPL rocket scientist that I just talked about that was all butthurt about the fact that, this thing didn't work the way he thought it should or whatever. about a year later, I was at a convention, and this tall, skinny, I mean, just imagine the quintessential cowboy from the old west. That's what he looked like, just leather faced and, you know, white kind of beardish thing. Looks like he just came to the convention from herding cattle across the prairie. And he comes up and he's like, you know, I just want to say, you know, I like how you write and I like what you write, but I was reading this story, you know, because he's a Sony fan. He's a, you know, it doesn't look like. That's why I said you never judge your fans by their looks, because you have no idea who likes what they like. But he was like, but my career is, I'm actually a professional locksmith, and yeah, it yeah, it really, that's the only thing you've ever written that I was like, you don't really understand anything about lockpicking. And so, like, it will happen, like it will. I got a friend who, she had in one of her books, this was 15 years ago or so, but she had a 22 Glock, and she had the model number and all that. And there's this innocuous scene where she goes, and then, you know, the character puts the safety on and puts it in the holster. And she got like 10 emails in. That gun doesn't have a safety.
Yeah. Even I know the Glock doesn't have a safety.
Well, Glocks have safety. It's just this one model of
Yeah,
20 pistol.
Yeah, the Glock 22 famously doesn't have a safety. It has a 3-point trigger.
Yeah. So, but still, so you're like, it's just the way it is.
But see, that again, like that point is very relevant to that Glock story. Okay. So if you're going to be so accurate that you say Glock 22, you had better get that right.
Right.
If you just say put Glock in, that's fine. People will assume it's one that actually has a safety, because there are Glocks that do have safety.
Right.
But if you use a specific gun type,
or a specific
God,
or a specific breed of horse, or a specific whatever. Yeah, exactly. If you're getting specific,
everything must be 100% correct about that piece of equipment there. Because the thing is, if somebody can Google it, like if it's a story that is set in today, whatever, you know, it's like an actual thing in our world, and somebody can Google it, and they're like, but this is bullshit, then you lose believability. And then they look at everything else that you do, and they start getting all like, I'm not sure that I believe your book anymore, your story anymore, your whatever.
Yeah.
And when that happens, you start losing your reader, because now, instead of being immersed in the story, they're like, okay, but why? And they start looking too much for reasons, as opposed to just believing your world. And that's why it's important to, if you're going to break what the readers expect, like I expect different planets to evolve different creatures. Like I expect different continents to evolve different creatures, to be honest with you, because you don't see elephants in freaking America, right?
What are you talking about? I saw one just a couple months ago.
Now, yes, but not
in a tent.
Not back then. Like, so if you're going to break a reader's expectations, you need to give them a reason for it.
Yep. Yeah. And I'll push back a little bit. I mean, everything you said is gospel, but, and I think I've told this story too. I had a scene where I have a ship that's leaving port. And so it's a sailing vessel, and I don't really know anything about that time period or anything like that. So I found an expert and talked to him, because I was looking for a couple things to say. And, you know, what are some things that a captain would be screaming at his crew during this time, and blah, blah, blah. And he literally, the one that's always stuck with me, there's two in there, but one that always stuck with me is the captain screams out, "Prepare to back and fill." And he told me what it means. I don't remember. I honestly don't. But it's something they say. Yeah. And I'm like, that sounds really, really cool. Yeah. And so it's in there, and no one's ever popped it, because it is a legitimate thing. It has something to do with leaving the dock area. I don't know. I can't even think, like, what does that even mean? Back and fill. You're on a boat. But anyway, it's cool. It's a legitimate term. It added some, you know, some realism to it, but I don't know actually any reality to it. As some expert gave me this one little tidbit, and then I threw it in there, and it fits really, really well. So again, it's just, you have to take the reading. I say this every day. I feel like the only thing that's real is the reader.
Yeah.
Those two planets in this sci-fi thing are not real. The creature that's on both these planets isn't real.
Yeah.
None of this stuff is real. The only thing that's real is the reader. So you've got to constantly keep them in mind. How is this going to affect the reader? I talked about this last night at my critique group, where, I kept saying every word, every paragraph, and because we did this exercise where we're kind of going through something that I had written, and I'm like, look at the paragraph and don't pay attention to what's written. Read the paragraph and then think to yourself, what does this do for the reader? What are they feeling? What are they learning? What are they being moved by? What are they questioning? What are they, what mystery is given to them? Whatever. What action are they seeing? What emotion are they being forced to feel? And go through, because, they had my thing, I gave it to them. So I said, in your spare time, go through it and go through every single paragraph and write that out next to it. And I guarantee you, every paragraph of everything that I wrote, you will be able to write this reader gets column. And every single, and so then when you take a look at it, you go, oh, that's why this chapter works. Because look at everything that the reader gets, exactly when they get them. Because that's another thing I said is, look at the order of when I've given them these things, so that one builds upon the other. And yes, this is 301 level theoretical story structure stuff that I'm talking about here. But do you want to get there? Is this where you want to be? And obviously I don't think about that now, because that slows you down tremendously. But 15, 20 years ago, that's where my mind was. And so I was constantly looking at every paragraph. I actually did have a little chart where I'd write down, does this paragraph give anything to the reader that's new? And, what does it give them? And why is it here? And it's the same thing when it comes to believability. You don't have, it depends on what you're doing, as we just talked about, with fantasy versus soft sci-fi versus hard sci-fi, whatever. But if you're always keeping the reader in mind, if you're always going, okay, someone's going to be like, oh, how are there two creatures on two planets that are literally hundreds of light years apart? How does that happen? But it's also this, because this also happened last night. I don't remember exactly what it was. But one of the authors was writing fantasy, and she did something, and I went, oh, I remember what it was two names that were very, very close together. And so I was like, is there a plot driven reason why these two names are one letter off? Now, if she had said no, I would have gone, then change it.
Yeah.
Like, just, you're done, end of discussion. Don't. And she's like, yes, actually, here is the reason. And I'm like, okay. So, because it was their characters' last names. And I was like, great. So everything you just explained is really cool. However, we don't get that information in this chapter. She's like, no. I'm like, then don't give us their last names in this chapter.
Yeah.
They've got first names, because she gave the whole names.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't need their last names right now. And that is a cool thing. And we do, like, I really like the idea that she had. But that idea has to be, you have to be bam, bam. Wait, your last name is this, but your last name is that. Why is that? That's weird. And then they, you're in a time, because in the scene that we were reading, that's not the place for it. We can't do, why is your last name one letter off from, like, there's other things going on that obviously are not going to have people talking about last names and spellings. So you look for an organic, and that's why I, advised her, and she's like, okay, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Because again, that still goes to that believability thing. Because if you have these two and you don't give any explanation, and they're like, oh, you're going to find that stuff out later. I'm like, yeah, but they're just the spellings of last names. That's not earth shattering. I'm going to forget about it. It's just going to frustrate me here. And then I'm going to forget about it by the time you give me the answer.
I also want to, expand on that point in terms of reader expectations. Okay. So, and this is one of the reasons why we say try and find a way to give your characters hair color and eye color fairly early on, right? Because even with something that simple, the reader is going to imagine something. Whatever you put on the page, whatever you don't put on the page, the reader's mind is going to fill in, right? And if they fill in with something like, oh, all planets are differently evolved, like I did. I go fill in all continents or different, whatever. Like I fill these things in my head, okay? And you then come chapters later and you shatter my expectations. I feel lied to. Like, I'm not saying that you lied to me, you didn't tell me. But because you didn't tell me, I made it up. And now I feel like I've been incorrectly imagining all the chapters I've read up to now. And that costs you, the author, it costs you my trust.
And I will agree with that on things that are big. So let's just keep with the hair. Let's say the way it's described, I'm imagining that it's that they have brown hair, and at the end of the 10 chapters in, I find out they have black hair. That's not that big of a switch for me. But if they have flaming chartreuse hair, like, I don't, first of all, I don't even know if that's a real color, so I don't even know what that looks like. But second of all, like, okay, no, I thought it was brown. Like, that's very, very different. And this is a rabbit chase, but I've been revamping my character class and how I teach character development, everything like that. And one of the things that I really started discovering through my years is you really don't want to do a lot of descriptions of hair color, eye color. Like so many new writers will do this litany of and then Jane, walked into the room, or Jane found herself in the room. She was a 45-year-old businesswoman with blonde hair, blue eyes. She was 5'7", had wore a size 3 pants, and they just do this. They do this whole description of their main character. Nobody cares, nor does anybody remember. But here's the big thing: what does Harry Potter look like? Not from the movies. What does he look like from the books? If you just had the books, what does he look like?
Green eyes, black hair, scar on his face.
And he's a boy.
Yeah, that's good enough.
And a lot of people don't even get the green eyes. You remember, most people are like, he had round glasses and a lightning scar. Like, that's what most people will get. They don't even get the hair. They don't get the eye color. They remember the round glasses and the scar. For the most part, that's really what you want to do when you want to have something that's unique. So what does Sherlock Holmes look like from the novels? His jacket and his hat. That's what he looks like. Like,
he has long fingers like a surgeon when he plays violin.
Yes. So really what you want to do, and again, this is a rabbit chase, this has to do with believability. We're now taking a detour. When you describe your characters, and I'm not talking about secondary characters and tertiary characters that I'm looking at, that I'm the POV character and I'm looking at these people. Sure, describe the crap out of those are fine. But when it's your main character that we're following, you want to do descriptions. First of all, you want to pick only a couple. They want to be very unique to this character, but they also, like what you just said, and that's what made me think about it, you want them to be plot motivated. So Sherlock Holmes has long fingers like a surgeon that he uses to his advantage when he's playing the violin. That tells more about this character than the fact that he has long fingers. The lightning scar on Harry Potter's forehead, it's a huge plot device. It matters to the story. And so it becomes memorable. And so if you really want to make your characters memorable, 1 or 2, maybe 3 very distinct things about them that all have impact. Not because if you're just like, and Drake had red hair, and then no one ever mentions it, it never comes up, nobody ever cares, then nobody's going to remember that I had great red hair. I don't have red hair, by the way, if you're not looking at me on
what's funny though, like, speaking of red hair, Louis has red hair, herself has red hair. It's a thing in that family, right? That's like one of the things about that family. And I have one reader who consistently, every time that I mention that herself has red hair, he's like, I thought she had black hair. I'm like, my dude, she's never had black hair. So I don't know where he picked up black hair. I think that's just readers are sometimes weird.
Yeah, exactly. So that has nothing to do with believability, but just since you went down there, and I am kind of working on this new class. It just made me kind of think about that. But getting back to believability. Oh, did you want?
No, believability. Let's get back to believability.
So back to believability. Another thing we talked, what was, I'll let you pick the next one because we talked about a couple things and I've got one that I wanted to go to, but.
So it was the planet thing that bugged me. And then it was also like a tech level thing. So there's this one girl needs a tonic that has a unique component in it, which
That's
is
a good way to say it.
Well,
without getting
I don't want to give away
on...
the plot of the author, and B, let's just say that when I read the part about the component required to make the tonic, I rolled my eyes so hard I nearly sprained them. Like, it's not that she needs that specific, like all of that specific component. She needs an amino acid found in this component. And I'm like, okay, but this is nonsense. They have faster than light travel. An amino acid is a chemistry problem. How? How do you want me to believe that they cannot create this thing in a lab when we can do this kind of thing in our labs and we have not solved the faster than light problem? It is literally unbelievable. You cannot tell me that they have regressed in chemistry.
Yeah. And I was laughing because you were reading a spicy genre. And so I like what you're like, it's a component to a tonic. Like, yeah, no, it isn't. But it's a good way to stop us from getting demonetized by just calling it that. So that's why I was laughing.
It was a very spicy book.
And it was a spicy component. So yeah, but that just still goes back to, so one of the things that I do in my chapter breakdown sheets at the end, so it's what I use for plotting out a chapter to go up and bounce back and forth and all this other stuff. One of the sections is reader questions. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm literally thinking about what questions are readers going to have as they read this chapter. Now, of course, what I'm looking for is questions that I want them to have. Like they're going to be wondering about how this is going to turn out, or they're going to be wondering where this came from, or they're going to be wondering whatever. However, you should also be thinking, are they going to think anything is dumb that I did? And so on and so forth. And then again, when you are in readers groups, right, critique groups, ask specific questions. If you're in a writers group and all you're doing is going to get typos fixed, you are wasting your critique time. Yes, get your typos fixed. I mean, I read something, like I said, last night in my critique group, because I normally don't read, but if we don't have enough people, I don't mind going in. I am working on something I really wanted to read. And, I'm looking for high level stuff. And actually, it's one of the things that I do want to talk about during this podcast. And I'm going to use that as an example. But somebody's like, oh, you wrote, I missed a D on the end. It was just a word. It was just the present tense version of the word. It just didn't have a D on it to make it past tense. And I'm like, oh, okay, thanks. Awesome. That's going to get fixed. Someone's going to find that, the pro writing aid or my editor or whatever, or me. Like, even though I read it out loud last night and I skipped right over it and I read it with a D. And that's the problem, is you put this stuff in. But if that's all you're doing, because I was like, great, thank you. Now, here is the question that I'm looking for. Here is what I need answers to. I'm appreciative that she found the D. I'm not belittling that in any way, shape, or form. I hate typos. They're the nemesis of my entire universe. However, like, why I'm here for this critique group is to get this bigger feedback. And so, like, and that's why you're reading this, because it's not right? I think this is one of those ones that's on Critique Circle that you're
Yeah.
doing, not
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So it's not published yet or anything like that. This is exactly what you want. You want somebody to go, my dude, why are there two creatures that are light years apart that are the exact same thing on two completely different alien planets? You know, my dude, why is this spicy component like they have light travel? They can't make their own amino acid combinations at this point. You know, those are questions that I want answers to, because we are all blind to our own writing in certain ways. And so having someone else be able to see something that you didn't see is vitally valuable.
And I think also on the topic of asking questions, when I introduce something new in my magic system, I always, but always ask my critiquers at the end, does this make sense in the context of my magic system as you understand it? And when I feel like my critiquers should be at a point where they understand my magic system, one of the questions I'll ask is, how do you think the magic system works? Because their answers at that point tells me how well I've shown it so far and where they're misunderstanding.
And the important thing that you just did there is it's an open-ended question. Never, ever ask a beta reader a closed-ended question. You know, I just did this thing. Did you love it? Like, first of all, you're baiting them. And so they're going to be like, oh, well, I didn't love it, but obviously that's not the answer they want. And I don't want to piss them off. So I'm be like, yes, I loved it. Like, no, you ask open-ended questions. You know, I killed Bob in this chapter. How did that make you feel? You almost want to be like a shrink on a, you know, with your patient, and your beta readers are your patient. And you're like, yes, how did that make you feel? You know, and that's what you're doing, because that's ultimately that's what stories are. They're feelings. That's why they're amazing. You're evoking emotions out of the reader. And so, and I stressed this last night when we were going through my stuff, it's about making sure that the reader feels what you want them to feel when you want them to feel it, so that that then builds into the next thing you want them to feel, so that when you punch them in the face with whatever it is, and I mean, you know, it could be unbelievable love or unbelievable happiness or unbelievable sorrow or unbelievable whatever, like when they get that punch, it matters, because you've built this story in a way, this scene in a way that leads us up to that. And so, you know, and I guess that's a good segue to this chapter that has been, I mean, I don't spend a week on a chapter, and I've spent a week on this chapter. There are some things that are very, very difficult about this chapter. So it's a chick that isn't human. She also doesn't really have emotions or a moral compass or anything like that, although she's getting them for the first time, and so they're freaking out. And that's really what the scene is about. The scene is about her freaking out, and she loses control. So what I need to do is I need to build from her just being like, I'm just doing my thing, to I'm so furious that I don't even realize what I'm doing anymore. And so that buildup has to be realistic. It has to feel like, oh yeah, no, I'm getting frustrated with her. I'm right there. Yeah, no, I've lost it. And so that's got to be there. The problem with this is that I'm doing almost all of it through subtext. And that makes it very, very difficult, because there are two competing things going on. There are three guys trying to kill her. And so she's literally in the middle of a Mortal Kombat, and she's not paying attention to it at all. It is so background noise, it's not even funny. And she's mad at herself and her emotions, but they're happening anyway. So there's this weird dichotomy of she factually feels something in the narration, and then she thinks, I don't feel that. And then she factually feels something else, and she thinks that no, that's not happening. And so there's this weird almost conflict between her narration and her inner monologue, which they're both basically the same thing. But like there's this one moment where the anger takes over, and it was a topic of big discussion, because it did accomplish what I wanted to do, but it's subtext. Because what none of the critiquers realized, they were like, okay, well, I have an issue with this section. I'm like, what is it? Now I feel this. And the other one was like, well, I don't feel that, but I feel this. And the third one was like, yeah, I actually feel this third thing. Now, they were different. However, all of them were basically close enough to what I wanted to feel, because the subtext behind it was the first time where she's no longer thinking about the emotion she's feeling. She's just feeling it, and they take over. And so that's the subtext behind it, is this whole time you've been looking at her literally kind of inner monologuing what her body is experiencing and not understanding why, and then also taking care of this fight while three guys are trying to kill her. But then there's this moment where she gets so furious at herself and it's something that happened in the fight, because she's not paying attention, that she loses it. And so all of them were tripped up by that, which is perfect because that's what I want. None of them got that it was the first time she was no longer thinking about her emotions. However, what each one of the readers did feel was close enough that and that's the problem when you're dealing with subtext. Subtext means you're not saying what you are trying to convey. You're trying to allow the reader to infer the information by something else. And so while none of them got the exact thing that I was doing with subtext, or at least in my mind, they all got it well enough that I'm like, yeah, but I'm fine. And so I don't need to make an edit here, because even though all of you feel that I have made this mistake, that's exactly what you should feel. You should feel like, wait a minute, something's just changed and this isn't consistent anymore. Right. Because her emotions are now in control of the driver's seat and she's no longer there. And so that's really that believability. And again, that may sound weird where you're like, well, wait a minute, you just threw all three of your readers out because they feel this inconsistency. Right. Because that's actually what I'm trying to do in that moment of the story. I'm trying to make them actually now be very uncomfortable about this is very, very different, because she's now lost control. She's very uncomfortable. She no longer has the ability to make any decisions on what's about to happen over these next couple of paragraphs. And so it worked really, really well. But that I rewrote this thing like 10 times. You've read it and edited it, and like I've really tapped everybody that I could possibly tap to kind of give me feedback on this, to make sure that I'm doing that. But again, going back to what you were saying, it's coming with those open-ended questions. So like when they popped, the first person popped in and was like, yeah, I got a problem with this scene. It really threw me out. I'm like, oh, okay, that's very interesting. How did it make you feel? Okay. I know what I'm trying to do, but I'm not going to say, because the knee-jerk reaction to so many new writers is they'll say, well, if this threw me out, and they'll go, well, it's because I'm trying to do this thing. No, don't give them that information. Dig into them and find out what they're actually feeling, and then think, is it close enough to what I want them to feel? Is it what I'm trying to accomplish in this moment of the story? If it isn't, if you've like, I think I've told this story before. There was this was early on in one of my private critique groups. So the way I do my critique group, since I'm usually the strongest writer, when someone reads, I let everybody else critique it first before it gets to me. And then basically, when they're critiquing, I might add something if they just are not hitting the topic or whatever. But when it comes to me, I'm really just the cleanup guy. Whatever everybody else missed, I'm going to pick those things up. And so this girl read, and it was this fantasy story where it was a brother and sister, and they're out working in the fields, and they're kind of, playing around and kind of grab assing and all this stuff. And it's this, just this simple thing. And so it finally got to me, everyone said, I'm expecting this to happen, and no one said it. And so it got to me, and I was like, so this brother and sister are boning, right? And the author was just horrified by my statement. And everyone else in the room went, oh, thank God that you said that. Yes, they absolutely are. And I'm like, why didn't you guys say that? Like, it's obvious that the writer was not trying to imply that these brothers were in an ancestral relationship. But she was 100% implying that they were an ancestral relationship because of how they were flirting with each other. It was not in a brother-sister kind of way. There was so much sexual undertones in the subtext of what she had written, and she didn't notice it. Author absolutely that was not what she was trying to do. But here's the thing. If she didn't get that and then it goes to press and she gets published, she's going to find out.
Yeah.
Like, and the worst way to find out about it is through, 150 Amazon reviews that are all slamming you because you've got this weird ancestral relationship between these two brothers or this brother and sister, and it's just weird. And it doesn't fit the story and blah, 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 blah. You want to get those in your feedback of critiquing. That's what you want, because then she was easily able to go, oh, okay, yeah, okay, I see it now. Like, now that you pointed out, it's very plain. And then she was able to adjust and change. Now we only saw this one scene, so she easily could have gone, when I said they're boning, she would have been like, yeah, I'm glad you picked up on that. That's exactly, yeah, they are 100% boning each other. And then it's like, mission accomplished. Like 100%.
This is a different story from what I thought I was reading, but if that was what you were aiming for, yes.
Right. Going in a different direction, but that's fine. That's your call. And that's why that feedback is so important. And it's why I also preach to my critique groups. When you're being critiqued, you are acting. We talked about this a while ago on this, but it's worth saying 100 times. When you are being critiqued, you should be actively trying to prove yourself wrong. Every time somebody mentions something, your knee-jerk reaction shouldn't be, you're stupid, I'm God, I'm great, you don't know what you're talking about. It should be, okay, wait, I don't see that. Let's keep digging at that. What do you mean? Why is that not the way? Why do you feel this way? Because I'm not seeing how you could feel this way by the way I wrote it. Because that's usually what it is. You just don't understand how those words affected them in the way that it did, because it wasn't what you were expecting it to do. But it did. I mean, that's the thing, is what it boils down to is they say, this paragraph made me feel X. And you go, no, it didn't.
Yeah.
Like, you're an idiot. Like, they literally are telling you that it made them feel this. Now, they may be 1 in 100 person that feels it that way. So maybe you decide that you don't want to change it. But they also may be, 8 out of 10 people that feel it. So if I don't see it, I'm going to dig. And again, it's, why do you think it made you feel that way? What were the words that, like, how would you, and that's why, like, one of the rules that I hate with a lot of writers groups is they push, don't ever give advice on how you would write it. Yeah. And I get it, because the reason why it's there is so many people will just take it, and then they'll let other people write their stuff. And so I do have that rule. You can't say, here's how you need to write it.
Yeah.
Because now I'm trying to put my author voice onto you.
Yeah.
How you have to word it is, look, here's an example of what I'm saying. If you had written it this way, I would have felt that.
Yeah.
And then someone else go, oh, well, if you had written it this way, maybe I would have felt this other thing. And so what you're doing is you're giving options, as opposed to saying, you suck as a writer, write it my way, and then I'll be happy as your critiquer. Like, no, that's not the way this works. But you should be actively trying to convince yourself that you're wrong. You really should be trying to look for that. You may never get there, and that's great. It means that what you did originally is where you wanted to go. But if you don't actively try to understand that you're wrong, you're going to miss some magical moments that are going to improve your piece. Yeah.
So I just want to circle back to believability to close out the podcast, because I think we're hitting long in the tooth.
We are.
So in terms of believability, there's another angle to this, and this is going too far. I'm going to call out George R.R. Martin on this one, because he is the one who most famously does this. Yes, in the Middle Ages, there were some instances of people getting married as young as 11, 13, 14, whatever. Like girls getting married to 28-year-old men for political reasons. It did happen. But 100% of the people who read you are modern, current-day humans. And what you are putting in the book sounds like pedophilia.
Yeah. Well, there's also a thing to think about. A lot of people got married at 13, 14, 15, just in the commoners, because they were dead at 28. So like at 14 years old, you're middle-aged. You're 35 years old back then.
It
Like,
actually didn't
you are
happen
halfway
as
through your life.
Yeah, it didn't happen. I mean, I spoke to a historian about this, and they're like, actually, it didn't happen nearly as much as
Right.
people think. It was very occasionally, and normally when it did happen, when the child was that young, it would be a betrothal with like the marriage scheduled later when they are at least sort of grown up at 60, 15 or 60.
Right.
Because, you know, they knew that if you put a 13-year-old in a 28-year-old's bed, there are going to be medical problems. I mean, their bodies might or might not be mature enough to accommodate such a period.
Right.
Too.
Yeah, but not even going down that path.
Yeah.
The reality is that you do have to write to the acceptance level of our audience.
Yeah.
So, you know, when you do some weird things like that, just know, and we're not saying don't do it.
Yeah.
We're just saying that just understand you may not be as successful as you were hoping.
Also, the other thing is like, so I mean, Martin aside, because my gripe with Martin isn't that he had one child bride. It's that he had one child bride and then suddenly he had 5 child brides, and that denigrated Danny's whole story because she was, you know, anyway, side note there. But
no, that's actually not that we talked about this a couple podcasts ago with my problem with the Ted Lasso in season 3, where they introduced in the same episode 2 LGBTQ relationships that came out of nowhere, and they did such a great job with one and such a poor job with the other that it actually, to me, weakened the one that they did a great job on.
Yeah.
So that is actually very important, of understanding that stories are also have a saturation point. And if you do things like that, well, and it's in everything. Like, it just popped in my mind last night. We were talking about, you know, somebody was like, well, this is a fragmented sentence when they were looking at my stuff. I'm like, yeah, read the paragraph. And they were like, okay. And they read it. I'm like, what does that fragmented sentence do? And they were like, it has a lot of punch. Like, it's great. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I'm like, yeah. So you're popping me for grammar, but you're not looking at the context. Yeah. It's powerful. However, if I used fragmented sentences every third sentence, they don't have any punch anymore.
Exactly.
They lose their value. So it's the same thing with, you know, 5 child brides. You just, it loses its value.
It loses the value of Danny going through that journey.
Mm-hmm.
But also, we were talking before the podcast about somebody saying, you know, they're writing science fiction. They're like, but these people wouldn't even have walls, you know, because it's a science fiction environment, etc. Yes. But
well, they would have walls. They would just call them something else.
Yeah. 100% of the people who are going to read your books are on Earth and read English, unless you have your book translated.
Right.
So they're going to want a word they understand. And however you need to square that in your head, whether it's like I'm translating it from an alien language, whatever you need to do to square it in your head, you have to write for the audience that's going to read it, not the audience in your head that is playing out the story.
Again, because they're not real. And just to expand upon that so that we didn't lose anybody, 3 times in the last month, I've gotten this question thrown at me at different places. But it was always a sci-fi person. And they were like, so, you know, this whole story set on another world. And so, like, sure, they have buildings they live in, but it feels weird that they call them houses and that they have walls. I'm like, well, are they houses? And they're like, well, yeah, it's a house. I'm like, does it have walls? Well, yeah, of course it has walls. I'm like, and he's like, but it's an alien world. Why would they call it that? And I'm like, they wouldn't. But your readers, I mean, you can't just write a book in gobbledygook that has no, you know, or you could do like what Tolkien did and actually spend a decade making a language and then write in that language, but then write it in English in the next paragraph. Like, sure, I guess if you want to do that, I'm not doing that.
I'm also not reading your book at that point.
Yeah, it does make it like why I'm just going to skip everyone. I'd never read it. And some people love it. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I didn't. I never read one single paragraph written in Elvish in any of the Lord of the Rings. I skipped every one of them because the next chapter was written in a language I understood. So I just skipped through it and did it.
I also never read the songs, especially Tom Bombadil's songs. Not ever.
I like the songs. I mean, I don't like anything of the Tom Bombadil stuff, but I do like some of the songs in there. So that's what we're talking about. And so every time it's like, you need to be strategic is what you're really looking for. You're looking for, so like in Genesis Saga, there is no time pieces like we have. There's no clocks or anything like that. So I decided to ban words of hour, minute, and second because they just don't exist. And that becomes really hard because like just last night when I was working on it, I wrote a line where she said, well, I didn't want to bother you this late in the hour. And I was like, crap, that's a banned word. I can't use the word hour. It doesn't exist in this world. And then I actually spent probably 5 minutes trying to rework that one line so that it didn't sound stupid, but it still conveyed that she didn't want to bother this guy this late at night. Because the other thing is I also try to limit night. It's not banned, but anyway, I'm weird. So like with that, I just don't have minutes or seconds because it's fantasy and they don't need that detailed of time.
I'm gonna just say that if you're struggling with that out there, you, the listener, there's a video on my channel called Timekeeping in Fantasy Worlds, where you can
it's fantastic.
Do a whole thing about timekeeping.
Yeah. Well, but I decided to go easy on it because the only time that I really need to track in it is about an hour. And so I made a word, Arn, and Arn kind of sounds like hour. It has the same kind of cadence. It's still 4 letters. It sounds, it's a kind of a rhyming type word. So, it's strategic. I'm not going to, this is a fantasy foreign world that doesn't exist, that wouldn't have English. Why is everyone speaking English? Because the readers speak English.
Exactly.
And so, but you look for these little things, you make decisions, and these are all subjective. So you're like, well, I wouldn't do that. That's stupid. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Don't change hour. Use hour, but change, if you're really looking at changing something, you're just looking for things that are strategic. I mean, the one that I think is the dumbest, that every time I read it in that series, I question myself. But I decided not to have summertime, wintertime, springtime, or fall. Mm-hmm. But all I did was change the M to an N. So it's summertime, wintertime, springtime. And I know that everyone who hits it that first time is like, well, there's a typo. But then they're going to eventually hit it a couple times and they're going to be like, oh, wait, maybe that's not a typo. So I am seriously thinking about changing that. And it probably am because it just keeps bothering me. Because it doesn't bother me that I changed the word. It bothers me that everyone's going to think it's a typo.
So I think that is something worth changing, and I'll tell you why. Changing it back. I'll tell you why. If you're changing something like that, if you're not going to use hours, right? Like I took the conscious decision to not use hours. I have a time system based on a candle clock that has a calculated number of days. Now, what this enabled me to do is it allowed me to ground the reader into the world by using expressions like the wax drooled off the cable, the wax spilled off the wick, like time burning away, right? It allowed me to have references to this time candle, like
like a second, it's like a flicker of flame.
A flicker, yeah, right. Exactly. Like all of these expressions, but I also have idioms built around it. The same as we've got, like time is like a thief. I'm like, no one can stop the wick burning, stuff like that. Right, and because I have expressions like that, it reminds the reader that they're reading a fantasy world. It regrounds them in the world. And it especially helps when I then go to characters who are from Kisangi, whose time system is based on water clock, who have then different expressions because it helps distinguish them. The thing why I don't like your time, is because it gives you none of that. It's just
I know.
It's a single.
I know. Like I said,
yeah.
Since I'm in this rewrite, that's one of the things that I've just been like, every time I hit one of those, I go, you need to get rid of that, dude. Like that's not doing anything for you.
If you're going to disrupt the reader with a word they don't know, that word, or with a system they don't know, that word or that system needs to add value to the world building or the plot or the story.
100%. But that's a holdover. I mean, that's what I did in the original version that came out almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So then, for those that don't know, this is that series of mine that won a bunch of awards that ended up, the publisher went out of business, so it never got, the last couple of books never came out, and now I want to finish it for the fans. And so, but I don't want to finish it off of what I was writing 20 years ago. So I'm rewriting it from scratch.
Yeah.
And so I have this ability to not hold anything sacred. And that's one of those holdovers of, 20 years ago where I was at as a writer. That was a great idea. And now I'm like, you know what? That's not really a great idea. We can change that. And like I said, that's bringing it up here it's because I've been thinking about it every time I hit that thing. And I'm like, it's really just a typo. That's really what it is. It's a typo. So, yeah. So decisions made. I will change it in everything, and that's an easy fix. But Arn, I think, works really, really well. And then, since I don't have second, you still have moment. Wait a moment, I'll be right there. Whereas like, wait a flicker, I'll be right there.
Yeah.
Once you establish that, once the audience, now I don't have to establish moment, but once you've established flicker as your second, you can now use it naturally, and everyone is now trained on, oh, it's just a flicker of the flame.
Yeah.
So if I said, wait a flicker, like, oh yeah, no, I get it. Wait a second. They don't even have to translate it in their head. They just get it.
Yeah.
And so, these are all things. And again, they do kind of fall under this umbrella that we're talking about believability, because yes, we want them to feel the fact that they're in a world that's not this.
Yeah.
But we still need to make it believable, and we still need to make it legible and readable.
Yes.
And understandable.
The reader experience still has to be good. Even me with my dense world building and my I give you nothing, read it all from the subtext. Even me.
I
like,
literally dropped that last night at the critique pod. I was like, I mean, don't do like my podcast partner Marie and give nothing.
I give you nothing. But yeah, even me, I've got to put. So I mean, I make a point of establishing, that there's a time candle burning, and the word time candle should tell you what it does, and then I start using the expression.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I mean, did we cover?
I think we covered believability. I think that's a good place to end.
So just to kind of recap, just because we were all over the board, give your whether it's magic or science, make sure you give a reason that at least allows them to go, all right. Because then they're cool with it. Just give them something. When you're working through a scene, especially like through an emotion or whatever, make sure that the audience it's believable. Yeah, we started with this emotion, we end with this emotion, and this is the reason why we got there was because of this stuff. And it can happen instantly. I mean, we could be all happy-go-lucky, and then a bus comes by and runs my wife over. I go instantly from happy to, oh my God, shocked and grieving and all that, in a literally a blink of an eye. But we know why, because that's a believable transition.
Yeah.
But it's the slower transitions, like this chapter that I'm talking about, where she starts off and she's not angry, and she ends literally losing control. And so that has to be a build. You can't just, unless she's absolutely irate, which she isn't. So to make it believable, the audience has to feel that progression. And then for naming conventions, just you still have to make it believable in your world, but also believable and understandable in our world.
Yeah. And I think that is a great place to end this podcast.
Yep. Bye.